Hello and welcome to The Real Reflected, where I try to have a philosophical look at events or phenomena that exist in our society and that I think are worth having a look at. Today, I want to have a look at something which is perhaps not very prominent in the news and in the media, but it's something that I read in a series of articles that were published in Le Monde, which is a French newspaper, because I live in France. And this was about transhumanism. So what is transhumanism, if you don't know? It's the idea of transcending the limitations of, the human species, I suppose, essentially by using technology. What I want to focus on today is one aspect of it, which is the idea of becoming immortal. Now, the idea of wanting to become immortal is not something recent or something new, I don't think, but it's been really prominent and important as a science fiction theme, right? And so I think it's interesting, not something I want to pursue in this video, but it's interesting to know that a science fiction idea, which belongs to the world of imagination, belongs to the world of dreams, belongs to the world of creative possibilities, is now becoming something that belongs to the realm of the real, of reality. So the dream is becoming real, which means it's the end of the dream, right? Which is something always very, philosophically speaking, something quite bizarre and very worrying. So something to think about, perhaps at a different time. So I want to focus on this idea of immortality. So the suspension of death. So how are people thinking about this? Well, as I said, it's by means of technology. So there's money being invested as I speak, right? Money being invested in medication to eliminate aging cells, or some people are being cryogenized, which means they're being frozen in the hope that one day science will be at a point where people can live forever. At that point, these people would then be brought back to life. There are other projects, but all of them are really very much driven by investments, capital investments, which belong to the world of the super rich, right? So it's something that we need to say immediately by way of preface, which is very much a project of the super rich, right? I think the average person on this planet is not really concerned with this project. But as always, right, when large corporations start investing money in certain projects, typically they will have an impact. Just look at what happened to AI, or just look at the history of the computer, right? The personal computer, the microchip since the 1970s in Silicon Valley, and look at where we are today, right? So when these things start moving along, typically it's a good reason to think about them. So I think start with this idea that it's really the privilege of the super rich is important. It's really the Elon Musks of the world that are driving this kind of development. If we take Musk as an example, not because he's the only one, but he's a good symbol. Right? If we look at what's on his agenda, well, obviously there's many things on his agenda, I think, but we all know he's very much invested in the colonization of space. And when I say space, obviously we all know we talk about extraterrestrial space, literally colonizing space in the sense of, for example, going to Mars and inhabiting Mars and things like that, right? So that's definitely a part of his agenda. I think now with this idea of, transhumanism, we are entering the realm of the colonization of time. And that's actually what I want to focus on today. What does that mean? The colonization of time. How does the idea of immortality or immortal life, how does that affect time as applied to human existence? As I said, this is done really primarily through technological means. And this is not the aspect I want to pursue here, but I think it's worth mentioning, right? When people are talking about overcoming the boundaries of time by means of technology, it's essentially by us humans integrating technology into our body and I imagine also mind, or as they probably would prefer to call it, the brain, right? This is something you find in science fiction, right? Going from the sort of machines that we would attach to our bodies, like cyborgs and things like that, to more sophisticated microchip technology that we would integrate into our bodies. And then maybe through genetic engineering, we would just alter our natural genetic makeup. But it's always just technology, right? Now, I don't want to pursue that here today, but in a previous video, I talked about technology in a different context. So I think some of the arguments also apply here. Us humans becoming, not just using technology, but becoming a part of technology, something quite fascinating and also terrifying about that. So, as I said, I want to focus on time today. So what I want to start with to get us into the idea, the philosophical aspect of the philosophical analysis of time, is two concepts that are actually used in science, and I want to use them to allow us to kind of get an idea of what time could mean for us as humans. The concept I want to talk about is the difference between extensive and intensive properties. So this is used in physics, right? So an extensive property is one that is proportional to the size of the system you're talking about, or the thing that you're talking about. So a simple example would be weight, right? The property of weight varies according to the mass. If we assume that, gravity, if we talk about, terrestrial atmosphere, if you assume gravity is constant, right? So it varies with the mass of the system or the thing you're talking about, right? Which means it's an extensive property. It varies, or it's proportional to an additive property, which is mass. If you add more mass, you have more weight, right? Extension. Intensive properties, on the other hand, are not related or not proportional to the mass or the size of the system. So an example would be temperature. The temperature of a system does not increase if you add more molecules of the same temperature. So it doesn't correlate to an additive property. More molecules do not equal more heat. So intension and extension, two properties. So I'd like to apply that difference to time. So then we would have extensive time and intensive time. So what would be in extensive time? Well, it's the time that we know from science. It's the time that we know from quantifying time. It's time that ticks, and that's actually just moving along indifferently, I guess we could say. So you can say it's an extensive property because it obviously the quantity of it varies with the amount of time, quite simply, right? So, but what would time be as an intensive property? Well, I think this is the important thing, and this is a topic that's explored, if you want to pursue this a bit further, very much in a field of philosophy called phenomenology, which is where they try to analyze the way we experience things, the way it appears to us in our human experience. So I think that the way time appears to us is never just purely extensive. That's at least the point of view that people try to develop in phenomenology. There's always another quality of time. So we can call that intensive. So what does that mean? The intention of time, intention with an S then, of course. Well, the best thing I think is to just take an example, and that would make it a simple example that would probably make it clear. Imagine you're doing something you don't like very much. So what happens then? Well, you quickly get bored, or after a while you get bored, you might get tired, and you start looking at your watch like, oh, how long is this going to last? So this is a good example. Why? Because it shows that when you're not enjoying, or when something is not interesting to you, you look at time from an extensive point of view. Time is being more and more reduced. The less something is interesting to you is more and more reduced to an extensive property. Right? It's like how many more seconds, how many more minutes do I need to do this? Right? On the other hand, if you take something that you really enjoy, we've all had that experience, you're completely absorbed by it, and time as an extensive property doesn't even exist, right? You look after a few hours, perhaps you look at your watch and you say, or your phone perhaps, and you say, oh, wow, I didn't know it was that late, right? So these two experiences really indicate to us really clearly the difference between extensive time, which is, again, just time ticking, and intensive time. And so it allows us to understand what this intensive property of time actually means. It's the property or the quality of time that reveals itself to us as meaning. The things that we do have meaning because they have an intensive quality to them. So intention is the quality of time, and that is related to the meaning. I think we can define meaning more precisely as the degree of intensity that quality has, or the intention has. So intention is the quality, degree of intensity is the meaning. Why is it a question of degree? Because I don't think things just have meaning or not. It's not an all or nothing thing. You're not always just completely absorbed by what you're doing, or it's completely uninteresting. No, there's many degrees of that. So I guess you can talk about it as a scale of intensity. So if we take that definition of time and we return to the question of immortality, then our question becomes, does the fact that extensive time, which is the time that's just moving along neutrally, indifferently, does the fact that extensive time becomes infinite, endless, does that have an impact on the intention of time, on the intensive quality of time? That's actually the question of immortality. Some people would say, in a naive way perhaps, no, it makes no difference. We do the same project, we have the same meaning in our lives, except that we don't have to be bothered with becoming old and weak and dying. So it's just good news, right? That would be, I guess, the deliberately sort of naive point of view. Is that really true? So the answer I would have to that is, I don't think so. I don't think that this is how it works. So one way to look at this is, in order for the quality of time to have a degree of intensity for us, and I think what I'm about to say now is a bit metaphorical. I think we need to sometimes work with metaphors to make sense of how things appear to us. So for things to actually have meaning to us, in terms of a quality of time, we need to have a sort of compression of time. And it's that compression that makes that things have a meaning to us, and that they reveal themselves to us as meaningful in the present. So I think this compression of time is the present itself as it's revealed in the activity that we're doing. So if time then, extensive time, becomes infinite, well, this compression seems to, well, you can even say this compression seems to no longer happen, or at least it seems to lose its intensity. So there's almost a sort of mathematical way of thinking about intention and extension in time. As extensive time becomes infinite, intensive time is reduced to 0 degree of intensity. That seems to sort of present itself as a mathematical formula. So I'll say it in a different way to make sure it's quite clear, because I think this is the important thing of what I want to say today. So intention with regard to time is only possible if it is a difference that makes a difference. So what does that mean? Well, intention is a difference, which means it's a quality. Right? If you're doing something that has a certain quality to you, it's because it didn't have the same quality before you did it, right? So the quality is always a difference with regard to before and after, obviously. So it's a difference that makes a difference. So it makes a difference. It has a degree of intensity in your existence, right? If it has no degree of intensity, it won't really make a difference. I think this is one way to look at meaning, right? The meaning that we have when, or that we construe when we do things. Or perhaps a better way to say it, it's the meaning that emerges when we do things. It's a product of intensive time. So if extensive time is infinite, then nothing seems to make a real difference anymore. In other words, nothing seems to make an intensive difference anymore because you have an infinite quantity of time. That's actually the idea behind intensive time, or time as an intensive property, as defining meaning. Right? So that's the conclusion that we'll have with regards to this idea of immortality. It will actually reduce meaning to 0 degree of intensity. So does that mean that human life is then meaningless once we are immortal? I think in a way, yes, things will have lost their meaning. But that simply means, as we've witnessed again and again through human history, that we need to find new ways of constructing meaning, or finding new ways of constructing human existence. I often talk in these videos about the mode of existence, where we would be entering a very different mode of existence. And I'm not even worried about, or talking about, the potentially catastrophic effects that immortality would have on the planet's demographics. Although, let's be honest, again, we know it's the privilege of the super rich, so the average person won't really be concerned with that. I don't think we'll have billions of people becoming immortal anytime soon. But so to me, the actual reality of immortality as a species is not even the most interesting or most important thing about this. What's important about this is that it says something about the mode of existence that we have today, and the way that we have to experience time today in order to make sense of things, in order to make sense of the things that we do. And so it's something interesting to reflect upon. That's basically what I find interesting about this. All right, so that's all for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk about something else next time. Bye-bye.